I still remember that evening as if the air itself had turned heavy. It was Madison's birthday. She had turned 28, and our parents wanted the night to feel grand. They rented a private room in one of those Manhattan restaurants, where the walls are lined with velvet curtains and the chandeliers look like they were rescued from an opera house. Guests in sequin dresses and pressed suits raised glasses of champagne. The servers floated by with trays of oysters and caviar, as if this was royalty and not just my younger sister's celebration. I had come quietly holding a small box with a bracelet I thought she might actually wear. I took my place at the table content to sit in the corner. I had learned long ago that the spotlight always belonged to Madison. I never fought for it. I simply learned how to breathe in shadows. When the cake was rolled in, everyone clapped and sang. The music of laughter bounced off those velvet curtains. I was reaching for my glass of water when my mother stood folder in hand. The folder was thick, a cream-colored leather portfolio with a silver clasp the kind lawyers carry into courtrooms. She tapped it against the side of her wineglass until the chatter quieted. "Lauren," she said, smiling at me the way someone smiles before delivering a blow, "we have decided that half of your apartment, the one worth $1.0 million, will rightfully belong to your sister." I felt the glass stop midair. People craned their necks toward me. Some gasped, some giggled. My father raised his own glass as if to toast. Madison, her lipstick still wet from blowing out the candles, leaned across the table and whispered loud enough for the room to hear, "You only work, Lauren. That apartment will be useful to me." The room erupted again with clinking glasses. Laughter, applause, champagne bubbles bursting like firecrackers. I held the bracelet box under the table, my fingers digging into its edges. On the table before me lay the key ring to my apartment, 3 brass keys with a small silver tag. They gleamed beneath the chandelier as if mocking me. I wanted to say something to Rise and remind them that every brick of that apartment had been paid with my late nights and my careful savings. But my voice froze. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile you wear when you are no longer human but a mask. Inside, my chest burned. Yet on the outside, I poured a sip of water, nodded politely, and let them believe their cruelty had landed. It was not the first time I had been erased by my own family, but it was the loudest. And humiliation, once it is displayed under crystal chandeliers, becomes unforgettable. I looked around. Not one pair of eyes searched for mine in sympathy. Everyone was busy raising glasses toward Madison, as though she had just inherited royalty. The waiter refilled my glass without asking, pity flashing in his eyes, the only kindness I received that night. I pressed my palm against the folder when it was slid across the table toward me. It was heavier than it looked, filled with printed drafts of a will. My mother's handwriting lingered in the margins, bold and merciless Madison to receive half. The ink was fresh black strokes cutting through me like a verdict. I thought of the years I had lived alone, working through market crashes and sleepless audits, building a life brick by brick. In my apartment, the shelves lined with financial ledgers and novels. I loved the kitchen filled with pots I had bought one by one. None of them had ever asked to see it. Not once had they celebrated the closing of my mortgage, or the final payment that made the place mine. And yet here they were drinking champagne to divide it up as though it were theirs to give. The performance continued. Madison blew kisses to the room. My father told a joke about how I had always been the serious one. My mother said, "Lauren is strong. She can handle this," as though strength meant silence. I sat there invisible in plain sight, my smile a straight line carved into stone. Inside, I knew a storm had begun. The humiliation had lit something that would not burn out quickly. They believed they had written me out of my own life. They believed I would take the folder home and sign. But what they did not know was that every insult becomes fuel, and humiliation, when poured into the hands of someone who has worked for every cent, does not vanish. It waits sharp as a blade. I will explain how I turned this night into the beginning of my revenge, but that will come later. For now, tell me where you are watching from, and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money. The days after Madison's birthday passed like slow-moving fog, the kind that hides the street until you're standing right in the middle of it. I went back to my apartment, the one-bedroom space in Manhattan I had fought to own. The deed sat in my safe, stamped and notarized, a reminder that no matter what words my mother spilled under chandeliers, the law recognized me as the sole owner. Still, her voice echoed louder than the subway beneath my window. Half of your apartment will belong to your sister. I sat at my kitchen table that Monday evening staring at my phone. The family group chat was buzzing. Madison had already posted photos from her birthday herself in a sequin dress, the cake glowing the folder visible on the table like a prize. The caption read, "Future millionaire estate owner." Dozens of likes, emojis of champagne bottles, hearts clapping hands. Even relatives from Ohio and Florida chimed in with praise. Then came the messages that sliced deeper. My aunt wrote, "Lauren is so cold. She should learn generosity from her sister." My own father replied with a thumbs up. My mother typed, "She has always been too serious, too cold to deserve love. Madison will use the apartment well." I read those lines 3 times, my hand tightening around the phone. To see my parents put those words in writing, "too cold to deserve love," was like being declared unworthy in front of the world. Humiliation has many forms. Spoken words fade, but written words live forever. I closed my eyes and thought of the years behind me. 12-hour days as a financial consultant, night classes in accounting when others were out drinking. Every check carefully saved until I had scraped together enough for the down payment. The apartment was my sanctuary, not just 4 walls, but proof that discipline could build something lasting. And now my own family mocked it as though it were a plaything for my younger sister. Still, I did not respond. Silence can wound deeper than a shouted defense. Instead, I began moving pieces quietly. At work, I pulled aside an attorney. I trusted a client who had once told me, "Always protect your assets, as if your family might turn against you, because sometimes they will." We met in a coffee shop near Wall Street. Over steaming cups, he explained trusts and protections. "A living trust, Lauren," he said, scribbling on a yellow legal pad, "will place the apartment beyond their reach. You will be the trustee and the beneficiary. No one signs away anything without your consent." I nodded, sliding the folder of documents across the table. The same folder my mother had waved like a trophy at Madison's birthday. Now it contained bank statements, tax returns, the deed itself. He leafed through it with calm precision. "Good," he said, "you've kept everything organized. This makes our work easier." That night I walked home along Broadway. Neon lights flickered, taxis honked, strangers brushed past. The city was alive and different to my family's betrayal, and yet with each step I felt stronger. They could humiliate me in public, they could write cruel messages in group chats, but they could not erase the discipline that had built my life. A week later, another blow arrived. Madison updated her Instagram story, a glossy photo of her holding a champagne glass, the caption screaming, "Celebrating my future move into my sister's $1 million apartment. Can't wait to decorate." The comments poured in. "So lucky your sister is amazing for sharing." One bold follower wrote, "Lauren should just give you the whole thing." Madison replied with a wink emoji. I stared at that screen, the glow lighting up my empty kitchen. Betrayal was no longer confined to whispers at dinner tables. It was now a spectacle broadcast to strangers. My humiliation had become content. But humiliation, I reminded myself, is only the first act. The second act is silence. The third is strategy. I placed my phone face down, opened my laptop, and began drafting transfer forms for my savings, nearly $2 trillion, carefully accumulated over years. I moved it into a separate account in my name alone. No co-signers, no shared access. Step by step, I was walling off my life from those who claimed it belonged to them. They thought I was the cold one. In truth, I was becoming colder, sharper, like ice forming on glass. They believed I was passive. They did not see that silence can be the mask of preparation. But what they did not know was, I had already protected part of my assets. And that was only the beginning. Nights became my allies. I would sit at my small oak desk by the apartment window, city lights, reflecting off the glass while I spread documents across the surface like pieces of a puzzle. Bank statements, copies of the deed, notarized receipts, even photographs of the apartment's renovations I had paid for myself. Each page reminded me that my home was not a gift, not an inheritance, but something carved out of years of sacrifice. I had met with the attorney again, this time in his Midtown office, where the shelves were lined with casebooks and the faint scent of leather clung to the air. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. "Lauren," he said, "family disputes over property are as old as time. What matters is how prepared you are when they come knocking." He slid a packet of papers toward me. A living trust. "Once this is filed, no birthday speech, no social media brag, no family pressure can force your hand." I traced my finger over the notary stamp already embossed on the first page. The paper felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of freedom itself. During the day, I played the dutiful daughter. I answered my mother's calls, listened to her complaints about Madison's job search, or rather the lack of one. My sister spent her afternoons hopping from brunch to salon, then uploading filtered photos with captions like, "Hard work pays off." She had never worked a full-time day in her life, yet she was now broadcasting her future inheritance, as though it were a business she had built from the ground up. One evening, scrolling through her feed, I found a post that made my chest tighten. A photo of Madison leaning against her boyfriend's imported car captioned, "Future millionaire estate owner, our place is going to look stunning." My apartment reduced to a backdrop for her vanity. Strangers applauded in comments, some even asking when the move-in party would be. Madison replied with 3 champagne emojis. I saved the post to my phone, proof I thought that humiliation had become public currency. But instead of confronting her, I kept moving pieces in silence. I withdrew my savings, nearly $100,000, from the shared bank where my parents had once been co-signers for my first account. I opened a new account at a bank across town, where no one knew my name, where no family member could casually walk in and ask questions. Each transaction was documented, dated, stored both digitally and in a locked file cabinet in my bedroom. At the same time, I rented a small storage unit. Each week, I carried boxes there, family heirlooms, old photographs, the kind of things they would later claim as shared property. I carried them out, one by one, wrapped in plain brown paper. By the time spring rolled around, the apartment looked untouched, as though no memories lived inside. I told myself that appearances could deceive. On the surface, I remained the same, Lauren, quiet, serious, dependable. At family dinners, I nodded, smiled politely, even clinked glasses when Madison spoke of her future home. They thought I was resigned, defeated. But beneath that calm surface, I was dismantling their claims brick by brick. It was almost poetic. They had chosen to humiliate me in public, and so I chose to prepare my revenge in private. One night, my phone buzzed with a new message in the family group chat. My father had sent a photo of Madison posing in front of my apartment, building the caption reading, "She looks right at home already." The replies were filled with laughing emojis. I felt the familiar sting, but this time it was dulled by the stack of legal protections sitting in my desk drawer. I whispered to myself, "Let them laugh." Because what they did not know was that the walls they mocked me in front of were already shielded by ink stamps and law. I will tell you later how that very Instagram post turned against her. For now, know this, the plan was no longer just an idea. It was alive, moving forward step by step, like water finding cracks in stone. It was Easter dinner, the kind my parents insisted on hosting every year, with a long table set in the rented hall of a suburban country club. White linens, crystal glasses, lilies in tall vases, the sort of setting where appearances mattered more than honesty. Madison arrived in a dress the color of champagne, her boyfriend in a tailored suit. I came alone as usual, carrying nothing but my composure. The moment I stepped in, I could sense the undertone. Guests whispered their eyes, flitting from me to Madison. News spreads fast when humiliation is free entertainment. Dinner began with small talk, polite laughter, the scraping of silverware against china. But halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat and stood again, this time holding that same leather folder with its silver clasp. The one she had flaunted at Madison's birthday. She tapped it against her palm, eyes fixed on me. "Lauren," she announced, her voice carrying across the room, "we thought it was time to formalize matters. The draft of the will is ready." My fork paused midair. Madison leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "Yes, Lauren, this is only fair. You can't expect to hoard everything when family needs come first." Her voice carried the sharpness of entitlement, a tone sharpened over years of being spoiled. She reached for the folder, slid it across the table toward me as though pushing a bill. I felt the weight of every gaze, the judgment hanging in the air like smoke. "Sign it," she said, almost gleeful. "That's your duty to us." My father nodded in agreement. "Family property should stay in the family," he added, though I noticed he avoided my eyes. I laid my hand on the folder but did not open it. Instead, I let silence stretch a silence long enough to make even the waiters pause mid-step. Inside, rage coiled, but I forced my face into calm. A faint smile, the kind that unsettles more than any shout. Then I reached for my phone, resting it casually on the table beside my wine glass. What no one noticed was that the recording app was already running. Every word, every demand, every threat was being captured. Madison's boyfriend, trying to impress, chimed in. "It's really the smart move, Lauren. She's the younger one. She'll build a family, children. They need space." What do you need that apartment for anyway? To sit alone. His laughter filled the room, others joining in nervously. Humiliation again, served like dessert. I looked at my sister. So you believe the apartment is yours? Her smile widened. Half of it, yes. And if you're smart, you'll sign tonight so we don't drag this out. I nodded slowly, then slid the folder back toward her. You should hold on to it, I said softly. I wouldn't want it misplaced. She blinked, confused, as though victory had been promised but delayed. The chatter resumed, but the tension lingered. They thought they had won again, that I was too weak, too quiet to fight. What they did not know was that the real documents, the living trust, the deed transfer, the banking protections, were already secured in a lawyer's office downtown. What they demanded I sign was nothing more than paper. What I had signed in private was law. As the evening wound down, guests clapped for Madison's toast about family unity. My parents smiled for photographs, their arms draped proudly around her shoulders. I excused myself early, stepping out into the cool night. In my coat pocket was a small card, heavy, with embossed lettering, my attorney's business card. I rubbed my thumb over its raised print, steadying myself. They had humiliated me twice now, each time louder, each time bolder. But humiliation is a strange currency. It can weaken you, or it can harden you into steel. And they had no idea the steel was already in my hands. The following week brought with it a crispness in the air, the kind that makes the city streets feel sharper, as though every corner hides a secret. I walked into my attorney's office once more, a folder tucked under my arm, though not the same one my mother had tried to force on me. This folder carried strength the signed documents for the living trust, the notarized confirmation that the apartment was mine alone and would remain mine beyond any family scheme. The attorney smiled as he checked each page. You've done well, he said, sliding them into a thicker binder, stamped with the seal of the state. This trust ensures that no court, no sibling, no parent can touch your property unless you allow it. They can shout, they can wave papers at parties, but the law does not bow to theatrics. I left the office lighter, though the weight of my family's betrayal still pressed on my chest. Their words from the Easter dinner replayed in my mind. Sign it, that's your duty. Yet now those words felt hollow echoes bouncing off walls I had fortified. 2 days later, an unexpected ally reached out. My cousin, a woman who rarely involved herself in family affairs, sent me an email with the subject line, "Thought you should see this." Attached was a thread of emails between my parents and Madison. I clicked, my breath catching. The messages were blunt. My mother had written, "Once Lauren signs, we'll list the apartment immediately. The market is strong. The profit will clear Madison's debts and set her up." My father replied, "Keep pushing her at dinners. If she resists, remind her she owes us for raising her." And Madison, never subtle, had typed, "She'll cave. She always caves. Just make sure I get the bigger bedroom when we stage photos for buyers." My hands trembled over the keyboard. So this was never about sharing, never about family unity. It was about stripping me down to fund Madison's lifestyle, to erase my years of labor for their convenience. I printed the emails, each page sliding out of the machine like evidence in a trial. I tucked them into a folder marked case file. The irony was not lost on me. They had tried to humiliate me with a fake will. Now I had their own words, proof of their betrayal, printed in black and white. That evening, I scrolled through Madison's Instagram once more. Another post, another glass of champagne in her hand, the caption reading, "Counting down the days until I move into my $1,000,000 apartment." Her boyfriend commented with a string of fire emojis. Strangers congratulated her as if the keys were already in her hand. I saved that post too. Screenshots stacked up, each one a brick in the wall of my revenge. At the next family gathering, they tried again. My mother cornered me near the dessert table, her tone sharp but sweetened for the ears of guests nearby. "Lauren, it's time to stop resisting. You'll feel lighter once you share. Your sister deserves this chance." I smiled, offered her a slice of lemon cake, and said nothing. Because in my pocket, folded neatly, were the trust papers and the leaked emails. Proof that their game was already lost, though they did not know it yet. Humiliation had been their weapon, but evidence had become mine. And that email, it was the nail in their coffin. It was a Friday night when the curtain finally rose on the scene I had been preparing for. My parents and Madison had organized a small celebration dinner at their house in the suburbs, inviting not only close relatives but also Madison's friends and her boyfriend's colleagues. They believed they were on the verge of victory, that I would finally hand over what they had claimed as theirs. The house was alive with Chatterglass's clinking music humming from the speakers. Madison floated through the rooms like a hostess in her own mansion, already calling the place our estate. I watched her laugh and pose for photos against the living room wall, as though she were christening a property she had never owned. When everyone had gathered, my mother stepped forward, folder in hand once again. Tonight, she said, her smile broad, we will toast to family unity, to Madison's bright future, and to Lauren for finally understanding her duty. The guests applauded. Madison raised her glass high. It's official, she declared, half of the apartment worth $1.0 million is mine. Soon we'll sell it and move into something even better. That was when I stood. My hands did not tremble, my voice did not waver. From my bag I drew a different folder, heavier, stamped with seals and bound in navy blue. I laid it on the table with deliberate care. This, I said, tapping the cover, is the only official document concerning my apartment. The room quieted. Madison's smile faltered. My father frowned. I opened the folder, revealing the notarized living trust, the deed transfer, and finally the printed emails. Those very messages where they had plotted to force me into signing, to sell the apartment behind my back, to erase me with ink and signatures. Gasps rippled through the room. Madison lunged forward, eyes wide. What is this? It's proof, I said, sliding the papers across the polished wood table. Proof that the apartment is mine alone, protected by law, and proof that you conspired to sell what was never yours. Her boyfriend glanced at the emails, his face tightening. Guests exchanged whispers, some covering their mouths in shock. Then came the final blow. The door opened, and in stepped my attorney, briefcase in hand. He greeted the room politely, then addressed my parents and Madison. I'm here on behalf of my client. Effective immediately, you are served with a notice of eviction. Any unauthorized occupancy of Lauren's property will be treated as trespass. He placed the stamped papers before them, heavy, undeniable, sealed by the authority of the court. Madison's face crumpled. Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. You can't do this, she cried. You're ruining my life. My mother tried to protest, but the lawyer's voice cut clean through the noise. The law does not recognize emotional claims. It recognizes ownership. And ownership belongs solely to Lauren. The silence that followed was thicker than stone. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some excused themselves, leaving behind half-finished drinks. Madison stood frozen, humiliated in front of her friends, her boyfriend, stepping away from her, as if the shame might stain him too. For years they had painted me as cold, unloving, undeserving. Tonight their words turned back on them sharper than any blade. I gathered the papers, calmly returned them to the folder, and slipped it into my bag. Then I raised my glass, not of champagne but of water, and spoke clearly. You wanted me erased. Instead, you erased yourselves. The taste of that moment was sweeter than any victory I had ever imagined. But I wasn't finished yet. The fallout came faster than even I had expected. By Saturday morning, Madison's humiliation had gone viral. Someone at that dinner had filmed the confrontation, the folder on the table, her shouting the attorney, calmly serving papers, and posted it online. The clip spread across social media, first among our extended relatives, then through her own circle of friends. By noon, strangers were leaving comments under her old Instagram photos. Future millionaire, more like future evicted. Madison tried to control the narrative. She posted a tearful video, mascara streaked down her cheeks, sobbing about betrayal. My sister turned against me, she wailed. I was promised half the apartment. She has no heart. The video lasted nearly 10 minutes, but her audience was not sympathetic. People dug up the champagne photo she had once posted, where she'd bragged counting down the days until I move into my $1 million apartment. Screenshots flooded the comments. One reply read, "So you plan to steal from your own sister and you're crying because it didn't work." Another wrote, "Entitlement doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart." Her boyfriend, the one who had mocked me at Easter dinner, unfollowed her within hours. By evening, his profile had been scrubbed clean of every photo they had shared together. As for my parents, they did not escape unscathed. A cousin leaked the emails, the very ones where they had plotted to force me to sign and sell the apartment. When those surfaced, the shame burned deeper. Neighbors whispered, church friends avoided them, and even their closest allies turned silent. My mother called me late that night, her voice trembling. "Lauren, please, this has gone too far. People are talking. We never meant for it to be so public." I held the phone to my ear, staring at the city skyline from my window. You humiliated me in public twice. Now you know how it feels. She tried again, weaker this time. We're still your parents. Yes, I said, and you chose to stand against me. Remember that. Then I ended the call. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No more family group chat messages, no more invitations. For once, silence was not humiliation, it was freedom. I cooked dinner alone, walked through my apartment, touched the walls, and knew they were safe untouched. But a story like this does not end with silence. Closure demands a final act, and mine came through the will reading of my late grandfather. We gathered in a law office downtown, a long mahogany table dividing us. My parents sat stiff, Madison beside them, her face pale. The attorney opened a folder far thicker than any my mother had waved at parties. As he read aloud the provisions, my breath caught. My grandfather had left nearly everything, his house, his savings, even shares in a small business, to me. Madison received nothing. My parents received nothing. The attorney's voice carried no emotion, only certainty. Lauren is the sole heir. Madison's mouth fell open. My mother's face drained of color. My father lowered his gaze to the polished table. I sat still, calm, as though I had been preparing for this moment all my life. Humiliation had been their weapon. Evidence had been mine. And fate, in its quiet way, had chosen my side. The law office grew so silent after the reading that I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. The attorney closed the binder, removed his glasses, and looked at me with the calm certainty of a man who had seen dozens of families collapse under the weight of greed. It is final, he said. Madison sat rigid, her hands balled into fists on her lap. The confidence that had once carried her through parties and Instagram posts was gone. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Her boyfriend had not even shown up. He had abandoned her long before this day. My parents sat on either side of her, pale and stiff their faces, a mixture of shock and shame. I should have felt pity. For a moment I searched myself for it, but all I found was an emptiness where pity used to live. They had stripped me of dignity at public dinners, laughed at me in group chats plotted behind closed doors to erase me. Tonight, their own plans had crumbled, and the silence was their only reply. As we stood to leave, my mother touched my arm. Her voice was thin, almost pleading. Lauren, can we not find some way to share? I met her eyes steady and unflinching. You tried to erase me, I said quietly. Now you live with the erasure you created. She withdrew her hand as though burned. My father said nothing at all. Madison stormed out, heels clicking against the marble floor, a hollow sound echoing down the corridor. I lingered for a moment, gathering the documents the attorney had prepared. Each page was stamped and sealed, heavy with authority. In my bag, they joined the trust papers, the eviction notices, the evidence of betrayal. Together they formed a record of what had been done and how it had been answered. That night, back in my apartment, I unlocked the door and stepped inside with a sense of finality I had never known. The walls, the windows, the furniture, all of it belonged to me, not just legally, but spiritually. They had tried to strip me of it, to laugh at me as they claimed it as theirs, but in the end they had only strengthened my claim. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the lights of the city stretch into the horizon. Somewhere out there, Madison was probably raging, posting half-truths to anyone who would listen. My parents were likely sitting in their kitchen, staring at one another in silence. But here in this room, I felt nothing but peace. Humiliation had been the spark. Betrayal had been the fuel. Revenge had been the flame that burned away their illusions. And now, only the ashes remained. As I set down my glass, I thought of all the people who might hear my story and recognize a piece of their own lives. In it, the quiet betrayals, the public humiliations, the battles fought not with fists but with patience and proof. If you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you believe there could have been another path, share your idea. Families and money, when mixed, they reveal who people truly are. For me, the truth is simple. I walked through fire and I came out carrying everything they tried to steal.